Hello and welcome to Setting the Stage, Episode 20, Kima and C City. We are looking for more people to interview, so if you're a DM or you know a DM that might be interested in coming on the show, you can check out more about how to apply at www.gocorral.com/sts. And without any further ado, let's get into the show. Okay, today I'm here with Kima to talk about his world. It's a cyberpunk setting. But first, let's learn a little bit more about you. Kima, you want to tell us about yourself and who you are outside of D&D?
Sure. So I actually grew up in New York, and I went to college for archaeology
Oh,
and
cool.
forensic science. So I actually have a background in all kinds of cool stuff. I worked as an EMT for a bit, and during college I absolutely fell in love with tabletop role-playing games. I just couldn't get enough of them, played every Friday night for my whole 4 years.
Cool.
But yeah, that's most of who I am now. I live out in Wyoming, and I work for the State Game and Fish Department.
Okay, yeah, a lot of jobs doing that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah. What are you doing specifically? I know there's like all sorts of things that are in that department.
I switched between 2 jobs. I work at a bird farm, raising and releasing pheasants, and I work in boat inspection and decontamination for
Okay,
aquatic species.
gotcha. Yeah, for barnacles and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Specifically, quagga and zebra mussels are our big 2.
Right. Have you ever read Danny, Champion of the World by Roald Dahl?
Uh, I probably did a very long time ago.
Okay, it's a book I remember being about hunting pheasants, where Danny's like this poor kid and he comes up with like a plan to steal all of the pheasants from like some rich jerk that lives next to him.
That definitely sounds like a. All right, for someone who's worked with pheasants for way too long, I would do anything in my power to get as far from them as possible. They're very pretty, and I love animals, but they are super dumb, and they just hurt you just by being nearby.
Yeah, if I remember right, how he does it is he like puts a bunch of sleeping pills inside of raisins and the peasants eat them.
Oh. Oh yeah, they live in a gypsy caravan.
Yeah, that might be. I'm
Cool.
not remembering all of it. Well, yeah, if you've had your fill of pheasants, then maybe it's not the right book for you.
No, I definitely
Yeah.
have. I almost got my nose broken by one. They're bigger than they seem.
Yeah, yeah. Where I live, we have a lot of like wild turkeys, so I'm
Oh yeah.
used to the annoying large birds that just hang around.
I spent some of the year in the mountain town of Story, and there are so many animals on the road in the summer because you can't hunt like right around the town. Uh, Driving the 7-minute stretch from like the start of the town to where I live, I would routinely see at least 30 or 40 deer, like in patches of
Wow.
10 all up and down the road, maybe even as close as 50 turkeys. Because you will see like genuine herds of like 15 to 20 just hanging out in the road.
Yeah, no, we see that for the turkeys, but yeah, that many deer is impressive.
It's mostly doe, just because they know that they can come up to the town and eat all our trash and no one can shoot them.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, that's pretty cool. I've never been in a place that had that many deer, even really rural places around here.
Oh, it's definitely got its downsides.
Yes, yes, I can imagine having that many deer could definitely be an issue for driving. So you said you got into D&D in college. What got you into like DMing?
So I started like learning about D&D in high school, but I just
Uh-huh.
wasn't able to get a group together. And when I
Okay.
got to college, I started playing in a club called the Storytellers Guild. And it was just
Oh,
like a
cool.
general nerd club. Every day was a different thing. Like one day was
Hmm.
card games, one day was LARPing. They even had
Yep.
like proper LARPing. Like they had one day where people just go outside and fight with swords. It was awesome.
Yep. It's called the Dragon Club at my college.
They called theirs Lockwind. But I met I played D&D for the first time, and I met an awesome DM, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I actually started DMing because my club ran into this issue where we would just not have enough DMs. So either people would be running so many people would break off and just run like a game for the whole semester. But that would mean that people who can't make it every week or people who just didn't know about the club, they're just shut out from that group forever.
Hmm.
So we kept having a
Yeah.
bunch of stragglers, and it would mean that one or two DMs would have to have like 10-person groups because there just simply wasn't enough DMs to get everyone in the game. So it was kind of born out of that, and eventually I became a head in that club, so I took it upon myself to make sure everyone had a game to play.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. That's really nice of you to do that kind of thing. And yeah, I've also felt that's pretty typical of D&D groups where you have a large group of people, and then people will split off a bit once they find a group that they're happy with, and they don't feel like they need to go to the big group as much anymore.
And I get it, because when you have that consistent group and you could play a story for a long time, you have just such cool moments and strong emotional bonds. It is kind of hard to do that when you have a shifting group of characters.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So are you still DMing for the shifting group right now, or you have your own like consistent group?
Not anymore. I did that for like 4 years through college, or more or less 3 years. I spent my first year kind of playing mostly,
Okay,
and then
yeah,
I
of
did
course
a
you're not there anymore.
yeah, I did a decent mix of playing and running for another year, and then I mostly started running when I was ahead. But now I happen to run one game of Pathfinder. Uh,
Oh, cool.
I just happened to switch off D&D. It had a little bit to do with the whole OGL stuff, but it was honestly mostly about balance issues. I just felt like whenever I would run games
Hmm.
of D&D, my players would be way too strong, and the power differentials would be ridiculous. So I would
Hmm.
have, a Circle of the Moon Druid who I can't even actually damage his real health bar, and then I would have like 3 sorcerers who have no health left and who are about to die. It's like, how do you balance that encounter? Because realistically, the enemies are just going to ignore the thing that they know that they can't kill.
Yeah, it's difficult. Um, yeah, I found like in third edition there was this idea of tiers for the classes, and you kind of dealt with that problem by having everyone within like one or two tiers of each other. But I'm not sure that like level of distinction ever developed for fifth edition, as far as I can tell.
It's definitely like a meta textual thing. Like, I think everyone knows that, fighters and barbarians are some of the strongest classes, and that ranger kind of sucks.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they don't really have like a mechanical level to that, but Pathfinder does a little bit more. And I just like how the balance works a bit more. The whole feat system, like level ups feel more impactful. Characters feel
Yeah,
more
you're always
unique.
making choices when you level up.
Yeah, and I'm not just seeing the same thing. Like, of course, there's some big stuff like battle medicine that you always see, but I'm not seeing like uh, Eldritch Blast every single turn over and over again. Like, that was something I hated D&D, how players would just have one thing that was like, there's no reason not to use it because it's just your best thing.
Right, right. I feel like Pathfinder can still have that, but the fights are a bit more dynamic just due to the monsters, is something that I've experienced.
Yeah, that exactly. I love that. I love how the monsters have like they have like builds, like they want you to follow a path. Like my players were fighting Groith yesterday, and they have this kind of like battle path where they try to poison you with a bite that does like no damage but gives you fear,
Hmm.
and then they start doing shock mind attacks on you, which don't do a ton of damage and don't hit super well. But if you're frightened from the poison, it hits much better. And I like how they kind of have that like plan built into their mechanics.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that for like basically every monster.
Yeah,
And I feel
exactly.
like there are some fifth edition monsters that are like that, but most of them are it hits and it gets advantage by doing this, and it hits for this much, and it has this much for defense, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, that, and they're mostly, I see, or I find that a lot of the high level creatures have cool stuff, especially named enemies in D&D, but there's just not enough. Like, most campaigns, I feel like, don't get too far past level 10.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that D&D 5th edition did to make the high level monsters interesting is mostly it gives them spells, um, which just don't really feel that unique to me in making that monster feel like its own. It's just like, oh, now the monster is also a wizard.
Yeah, pretty much. And that makes sense when they're actually wizards, but Yeah, you would think that like some kind of eldritch demon would have a spell that players can't cast.
Right, yeah. Or, you could modify it. Like there was something in third edition, like Abyssal Fire, where it bypassed fire resistance.
Oh, I like that. I'm always a big advocate for like interesting monster design, even if it's something
Yeah,
super mediocre or minor.
yeah. It's something I really like about fourth edition was having really good monster design, and I'm glad that Pathfinder copied that.
I really like the 3 action economy too. I feel like it lends itself really well to well, 3 action economy and honestly opportunity attacks not being like a common thing for enemies. I
Hmm.
feel like that changes the game so much in such a good way.
Yeah,
Like my players are no longer terrified to move in and out of combat range. They're no longer just wasting every turn doing the same thing because they have options. Like they're still going to attack, but now they can, try opening a door or try interacting with like a spell or like a trap.
yeah, yeah. Just like you have the options in character design, the three action economy also gives you options in the actual playing of the game. Because yeah, you can attack 3 times, but you're gonna miss that third attack, so you might want to do something else.
Yeah. And it gives, flavor opportunities. People can, it doesn't feel quite as bad wasting a single action if you have three just to, like spit at an enemy or something.
Right, right. So in your survey, you said you'd played a lot of games. Have you actually DM'd for all of these, or just like played for a lot of them?
I've DM'd for a lot of them. I actually have like my collection here of a lot of the stuff that I've played.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Definitely the bigger ones I played. I played a lot of 50. I played a lot of Deadlands Classic. I ran that
Uh-huh.
too. And that game is way too hard to run.
Okay. I've heard good things about it, but I've never actually played it or looked at the rules.
It's super fun, and it's got like the coolest world with just a ton of really good fiction writing all around it. But yeah, the combat system's rough. You have to roll like 4 times just to see like what a shot does. Like you have to
Ooh,
roll to see
okay.
if it hits, then you have to roll to see where it hits. Then you have to roll the damage, and then if it's like a certain amount, you have to roll like crit damage.
Okay, I see.
I played Eclipse Phase 1 and 2. Both very cool.
Okay. Are those a sci-fi one? Don't know the name of those.
Yeah, so Eclipse Phase 1 was kind of just like normal sci-fi, kind of like Expanse universe almost. And
Uh-huh.
Eclipse Phase 2 is like far post-humanity, to the point where there's
Okay.
like questions of ethics where like if somebody whose body is gone because they were on Earth when it was destroyed, who got backed up into like a satellite, if we put their body into the brain of an animal, and then we put that brain of an animal into a robot, what are they?
Oof.
And then it's like, what happens if we copy that person and then make a brand new one with the same memories and all the same personality? Is that a new person?
Yeah, yeah, the ship of Theseus philosophy problem, but
Pretty much. Yeah. It's really cool though, because it's got details where like there's laws. That's called forking, by the way, when you like copy yourself. They have like
okay.
laws about how long you're able to make like cellular or real copies of yourself to like help you with stuff. It's just a very cool world with a lot of very good world building.
It's interesting. It sounds like the same laws about copyright for freedom of use.
Yeah, pretty much. There's like an entire planet of megacorps. So,
Okay.
uh, but yeah, that was a big one. Goblin Quest is a very small game, but it's very fun. Just one of those little D6 systems.
Yeah, I think I have played that one once a long time ago.
Of course,
Don't remember much about it.
I've played Pathfinder, a little bit of Savage Worlds,
Uh-huh.
Ryutama, if you've ever heard of that.
I have heard of that one, yeah.
That's a very
Not much
cute
about it.
system. It's just like a little adventure system. It's got really low magic and really low combat. It's kind of more about like I don't know if you watched anime, but it's kind of like Kino's journey as a as a role
Uh,
playing game. It's kind of more about like traveling, meeting people, and like building a story together.
okay, gotcha.
But the DM actually has a physical character, which is cool. They have a sheet and they level up with the party.
Oh, that is pretty unique. That's not present in most other settings.
Yeah. Uh,
Systems. Sorry, wrong word.
so I've played the Expanse RPG, a couple of the End of the World RPGs, uh, and finally the one that I based my cyberpunk system on is called Soulbound.
Yes, I saw that, and so I was trying to read up more about it, and I actually found out there are two different systems called Soulbound.
Yeah, I think that I don't know if it's called Soulbound. I know that the person who made Soulbound, it was like an individual creator and it was kickstarted and everything. I know that
Hmm.
they were looking to make a second game. I don't know what they ended up calling it though.
Okay, yes, so the two different Soulbound games. One of them is the Kickstarter one you're talking about. The other one is actually a Warhammer-based one.
Oh, Age of Sigma, I see that now.
Yeah, yeah. So the other one that the Kickstarter person is creating is called Between Clouds.
That's right. That's the one about airships.
Yeah.
That's gonna be pretty interesting. I really like the Soulbound system. Hopefully you found the right one.
Yes, I did. I did. I assumed you meant the indie one and not the Warhammer one because you would have mentioned more Warhammer stuff.
I love me some Warhammer, but I admittedly haven't gotten to play Wrath of Glory or any of the Rogue Trader stuff yet. I
Yeah.
have all of it. I just haven't had the time.
Well, they're making you know the Kingmaker video games?
Yeah.
Yeah, the next one they're making is Rogue Trader.
Holy shit, that's gonna be awesome. I've really wanted to
Yeah.
play Rogue Trader for so long, and I just haven't had time to dig into the rules.
Yeah. Well, you will have a nice little
Next on
pocket for it
introduction.
when it comes out. Yeah. Uh, all right, yeah. So your world is done using Soulbound, and the description you gave sounded a lot like the Shadowrun setting to me. And I, my reading about Soulbound, it sounds a lot like the Shadowrun system, although hopefully not as excruciating from what I've heard about Shadowrun.
No, it's a pretty compact system. Character creation could be a bit weird, but generally I like the combat because you pretty much have one action and there's 6 actions to take, and they're
Hmm.
pretty much like a combination of attacking, defending, and moving. So like one is moving and attacking, one is moving and defending, one's like full defending.
Okay.
So it was a really quick combat system, and it used an octagonal board, like a hex board, which I just
Oh,
like way more for combat because I feel like it fits better than just having the awkward cubes of people around you.
how do you have like do you have squares in between the octagons to make that work?
Uh, Usually like no, it's like I don't think they're octagons. What's the hexagon? I guess is the correct word
Okay,
for it.
hexagon. Yes. All right. Yeah, that makes more sense.
I did not do great in geometry. It's been quite a
That's
while.
that's all right. You don't really need it anymore. Okay, yeah, hexagons. Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, hex map is much better for like outside movement, especially.
Yeah, and because the system doesn't have a lot of like magic AoE kind of stuff, it's not really an issue having to like measure stuff in hexagons.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, you just yeah move that many hexagons.
But also the system itself lends itself really well to just big creatures. I've modified the
Hmm.
setting. Basically, Soulbound takes place in like I don't remember the name of the plane, but it's kind of just like a fantasy world that's dark industrial. Like some places are villages, some places have technology. But for my
Hmm.
world, it was full cyberpunk city. They were in like uh, a post-war world. It was pretty much like nuclear apocalypse, except like hydrogen bombs. And it didn't destroy all of the world, but it did push everyone into like major cities.
Okay, I would have thought that a nuclear war would usually do the opposite.
Yeah, I thought that it would be interesting if instead of trying to destroy as many people as possible, they focused more on landscape.
Okay, so trying to destroy like a country's agriculture by
Yeah, because I figured
nuking
like if
it.
you nuke a city, you're going to disrupt a lot of stuff. But if you drop like 3 nukes in a line just down like the middle of the U.S., you could functionally cut the entire country in half with just a radioactive exclusion zone, and you'll destroy agriculture and trade.
Hmm.
You can still fly over that, but even that's dangerous before the radiation settles.
Right, right. Okay. So there's some sort of nuclear apocalypse that drove people into cities.
Basically,
Um,
yeah, just like a world event, like lots of wars and government, and it pretty much ended up with there being like last bastions of civilization. Like there was a big war a long time ago, and there's only a couple major cities across the world that are left.
okay, so outside of the cities, is it like Fallout wasteland with like monsters and stuff? What's keeping people in besides radiation?
It's very much like a Wasteland 3. Like, there's definitely areas that are completely like desert waste, but a lot of it is just like irradiated wilderness or just like. I also had the idea that the atmosphere would have been affected to such a degree that temperature would have just become extreme. So,
Hmm.
like, when it gets hot out, it gets really hot out, and when it gets cold out, it gets really cold out.
Yeah, I think plants kind of modulate temperature that way, so that makes sense if a lot of those are gone.
Yeah. So, like, hardy trees and things that live up on the mountains, they could find a way to survive. But for the most part, like, a lot of greenery is gone.
Okay,
And in the
gotcha.
cities, they moderate that because they just have the technology to be able to pump in heat or, cool the streets as needed.
Okay. So next question, obviously, where are people getting their food from if all of the agriculture has been destroyed?
For that, there's like a commercial district in the middle of the city that's like or not commercial, rather industrial.
Hmm.
And it's like a band that surrounds the city's kind of circular in nature.
Okay.
It's kind of rests near the coast, and at the center is like the promenade, which is where city government is, and all the corporations have their headquarters. And right around the outside of that is the industrial district, which is like now it's mostly tech. On the surface, it's mostly like hydroponics and like clean work because they
Hmm.
want it to look pretty, to be a nice view for the people in the high city, or not the high city.
Uh-huh.
It's technically the promenade.
Okay.
And then underneath that, in the underground, because the city expanded very vertically in both directions, that's where they have all the dirty business. So that's where they have, production and burning fuels and stuff like that, everything that creates dirt and pollution. And then they just pump that shit out through the city. So it never comes up and interacts with the upper city at all.
Okay, so they're doing like uh what's it like cellular agriculture, that kind of thing to produce
Yeah.
food now instead of traditional agriculture.
Yeah, and they even do like meat growing. Like they
Hmm.
have meat
Yeah.
labs that grow. I would imagine that there's not much real animals left.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. I actually work in that industry like professionally, so
Oh,
that's
that's
interesting.
awesome.
Yeah. Um, cool. Yeah, that seems like that's I suppose possible, especially if you have a little bit of magic backing it up.
Yeah, so that's the big back to the whole city is that there's basically these cities were able to stay because corporations specifically had such a strong hold on them. So every different city had a different corporation that was kind of like there mostly. That's part of the reason they weren't destroyed is because if they were, then the corporations would have stopped helping whoever destroyed them. And the specific corporation in this city is called Datafield Technologies.
Okay.
And what they have created is kind of like imagine physical Wi-Fi. The whole idea is that the whole city is kind of basked in this field called the data field,
Okay.
and it's emitted from these resonators and these like relay stations, and it pretty much allows people who have the technological requirements to perform like pseudo magic. So that's
All
how
right.
we modified like the system's existing magic to work for players. So instead of shooting a firebolt, they could do like a trick that would usually be used to light a cigarette and then kind of overload it to fire it off at somebody.
Okay. So it's allowing some sort of like power transfer in addition to information.
It's pretty much like technology magic.
Okay.
But yeah, it
All right.
transfers information is like the primary use, but people have been developing like or I called them cursors because in the system of Soulbound, uh, the big the big thing is that your character starts with a randomly generated weapon,
Okay.
and part of that is like the weapon will what the weapon is will be random, so it'll be random if you have a single weapon, two weapons that are combined, or two weapons that are paired, and then you'll
Oh,
roll what kind of weapons they are. So you
okay.
could have like a shotgun paired with like a glaive, or like a a sniper rifle that's built in with a crossbow.
This is sounding a lot like Final Fantasy with these weird weapons.
It is. It's got some. You can have a pillar. One of the weapons is a full pillar,
Okay,
which I rolled as like a part of a sewage pipe.
cool.
They'd get like a. I think they called them sigils, which was
Uh-huh.
like a magic effect that was attached to the weapon.
Okay.
So some were pretty weak. Some would do stuff like let you see like a glimpse into the future, and then as you leveled up and got stronger, it would get more powerful.
Okay.
And some of them were just wild. Some of them would let you light people on fire or like curse people.
Okay. Yeah, those both sound pretty useful.
So all that magic stuff was rolled in as like Datafield stuff. If you were hexing somebody, I reworded that as like hacking their system.
Okay.
But basically, the city is dealing with these people who we called cursors. Uh, they were starting to pop up more and more, and they're people who can manipulate the data field like to a greater degree.
Okay. And this works within Soulbound because it's also like partially an industrial setting, so like you're not really
Yeah, so it already
you
has
just
guns and stuff.
right. Okay.
And one, we did have to do a little bit of switching. Instead of classes, the game has guilds. So it has 9
Uh-huh.
guilds that you can join that are based on like it's pretty much like strength, dexterity, and magic.
Okay.
I changed what all of those were to mega companies in the city.
Oh, okay. So you have like
Yeah,
the
instead of being a guardian, you would either have technology or like work for Cyber Eye Defense Corporation.
okay. So I guess that's kind of the same thing. Like a guild is more of a union than a mega corporation, but
And of course, they didn't have to be like associated with them. They could just steal tech from that company if they wanted to.
oh yes, of course, theft.
But yeah, I did stuff like that. There's also like the corporate guilds, which were just force, reflex, and technology, which are it was just like because there's overarching classes.
hmm Okay. Um, man, I had so many different questions about the setting. I guess first of all, what's the city's name?
It's called City or Capital City C. So some people would call it
Okay.
C City or C City, spelled both ways,
Okay.
because it is the city associated with the letter C, and it's also next to the ocean.
Okay. Um, gotcha. All right. So it's a port city. Um, is there a lot of trade between the different cities at this point, or are they mostly just isolated?
There is corporate trade, but it's kind of a bigger deal. So
Okay.
I didn't do a lot of stuff for the outer world just because I didn't particularly need to. But what I know of it
Right.
is that there's not a lot of other cities. There's maybe 6 or 7 other like major cities
hmm
left, and there's a ton of small settlements, but the corporations don't care about them.
Right.
So trade shipments were like a big deal. Corporations would trade like locally, like up and down the waterway to like nearby villages or other small like projects they have to try to, reclaim some of the land. But for the most part, there would only be like maybe a shipment a month from a different city or going out to a different city. So it'd be kind of a big
Gotcha.
deal, and that would also be like an influx of crime. It gives an opportunity for people to disrupt the transport of all the goods, and it also makes those goods wildly scarce in the city.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it would be very hard to have individual trade because just how would you even physically do it?
Yeah, and fuel is kind of, in shortage because the world infrastructure has been destroyed.
Ah, yes. So the cities themselves are powered by, I'm guessing, nuclear fuel, or is there something else going on there?
um, as far as my players knew, it was nuclear fuel in
Oh boy.
this city. There was something a little bit more going on. Essentially, after the cities kind of became isolated, and it was clear that like the world was going to be changing, Datafield took control of the city, and they kind of supplanted themselves as like a corpo-fascist leadership kind of thing. Like they're in charge. They still let city politics happen. They still let people run for office and debate in council, but they kind of have the overseeing hand,
Uh-huh.
and they're the ones responsible for powering the city. And while they claim that it's fission powered, it's actually a dark project that my players were working to uncover.
Oh, okay. Um, what's the city like aesthetically? You mentioned it was like circular and that there were different like rings as you got closer, and it was like the outer bottom ring is like the worst one, and the upper top one is the best place to live.
Yeah, so I used to have a map of the city. It's somewhere in the myriad of folders on my computer, and it was never very pretty. It was like MS Paint. But basically,
Hmm.
kind of closer to the water, so it still can, a stone's throw from the water is the promenade, which is like the main district. It's kind of raised above the rest of the city, and for the most part, it's big, clean buildings, and it's a mix of brutalism, but it's not quite as ugly. Like you look at cities like New York City nowadays, and it's all just flat concrete buildings. It's that with a little
Yeah.
more oomph, a little more, gold flourish, a little more uh, lightning waves kind of arcing up some of the pillars and stuff like that. It's very clean. People there are very rich and well governed.
Hmm.
And then that leads directly into the industrial district, which kind of separates. Again, the above ground portion of that is very pretty. It's almost like a more of a garden than it is an industrial district because they keep all the gross shit underground.
Uh-huh.
So it's almost like just having a big park surrounding them. And after that is the high city, which is like, a normal cyberpunk city. It's a little bit grimier. There's a little bit more crime, but there's still lots of big billboards and there's lots of services for people. High-end shopping and entertainment. And then surrounding
Okay.
that's the mid city, which is like the boroughs, a little bit, worse neighborhoods. The mid city is mostly underground. Most people live like underneath other people's houses or in the sewers and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the low city, which is like the outer reaches of the mid city, and it's mostly cut off. It's kind of like the very outside of the city. And then there's the proper reaches, which are like the people who don't even want to live in the city but have to be close enough to it to survive.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
they're kind of like the raiders from the cyberpunk world or the nomads. They're very low tech. They rely on trade with each other. They found out how to survive collecting mushrooms from the pollution exhaust pipes and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Gotta get those mushrooms.
They mostly live outside the city.
So what would you say is like a good like touchstone to understand like the city's aesthetic? You said New York, so is it kind of like Madison Square and then down to, you know, Golden Central Park, and then I don't know, like the industrial part of the Bronx.
Yeah, almost like the high city. I would imagine the high city almost looks like Boston. Like it would still have
Okay.
greenery and stuff around. Maybe probably not real, but they would go
Yeah.
through some effort to even make like the outer reaches of the rich part of civilization to look nice enough. But I didn't. There's one place I forgot to mention. Directly below the promenade is just a massive piece of bedrock that it sits on.
Okay.
And it was, it's they can theoretically dig into it, but it would take so much effort, energy. It's just not worth it, which is why they just build the promenade taller.
Okay.
But
All right. Ah, I see that. That's like why it's vertical.
yeah, but people were able to dig underneath that pretty easily because just the sediment stone that was near that wasn't as strong. And that's where some of the city's services were. And then that's where a criminal underground began to flourish, and that's called Avernus. And it kind of grew to be the opposite of the promenade. So it's not even directly accessible. You have to make it to at least the mid city to begin heading underground towards Avernus. But then you
Oh,
head
okay.
right back directly underneath Promenade, like a good distance underground is just this sprawling downward spiral of like a criminal underground. Everything from black markets to brothels to like fighting clubs. And
Cool.
it's extremely difficult to govern because there's not a great way to get there from the mid city. It's only got a couple routes in and out. It's full of people who don't want to be governed,
Uh-huh.
and
Right.
they can't get to the rich people easily. So the rich people don't feel quite the need to stifle their underground party because they can't make it into the promenade or even the high city.
It sounds almost like how you kind of conceptualize vampires living in the dark and ruling over like a evil blood society.
I mean, there'd probably be something like that down there. I mean, even Cyberpunk had the vampire.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of like the main crux of the city was the balance between the promenade trying to maintain control and spread their influence, and that would come into contact with the influence of Avernus from like in the mid city, which is where all the cool stuff was happening. There were all these clashes between,
Yeah.
gangs and corpos and cults and special interest groups.
Um, so there's no like suburbs of the city, right? It's all just like one kind of continuous
Uh,
thing. I guess you could say like mid city and the low city are kind of suburbs,
yeah,
but
the
they're
mid
still
city and the low city are more
not
like,
unique.
yeah, they're less suburbs and kind of, yeah, they're more nebulous. There's not quite solid divides in the city. In
Right.
the high city, there's 12 different districts for the 12 different mega corporations that are underneath Datafield, which are like the 12 classes
Okay.
that the characters would follow.
Gotcha.
And also to reinforce that, which is pretty cool, the way the game handles leveling up is it makes some of your stuff stronger, but mostly in Soulbound you just get access to new gear.
Okay.
So that's how we ruled that because it was perfect. Normally in the game you would just do better and your guild would be like, hey, you're doing really good, here's a grappling hook.
Okay. And now it's like you get a promotion within your megacorp employee
Yeah,
position.
so like if you weren't an employee of the megacorp, they would be like, hey, you're doing really good, here's a grappling hook. And if you weren't, it would just be like, there's a shipment of grappling hooks.
Okay. So you're leveling up your equipment than your actual skills for your character.
Yeah, like your character would get a bit stronger, they'd get a bit more health, and some of their like powers would get better. But the big thing was you would have access to like a new powerful thing. And they were pretty strong. Grappling hook is a low level of it, but eventually you grapple things and it does damage, and then you grapple things and you have claws you can hang on to them with.
Okay. It's sounding almost like superheroes with the way you unlock more powers and abilities than numbers.
That's kind of how my players were kind of taking it. They kind of took it upon themselves to try to clean the streets up a bit.
Oh, cool.
But the big draw is that Soulbound is really good for big monster fights. So they have the
Okay.
Reavers. Well, they have the Akuma, which are kind of like in the Soulbound world, they're devils. And even just killing them, you have a chance to become corrupted by them. And it gives you a
Ooh.
bunch of cool new powers, but if you get too corrupted, you'll just die.
Okay.
So that was the thing that the players ran into. They only interacted with one; they didn't get a chance to fight it yet. But there's also Deceivers, which are like giant monsters, pretty much.
Okay.
So in the Soulbound world, it actually has some cool drawings that show their anatomy. So what made me fall in love with the system is that when you're fighting some of these creatures, like the right way to fight them is to like find a specific organ and then strike at it.
Ooh. Okay. Yeah, that's very cinematic with how that would work, is that like you'd have to keep testing different points to find the weak point, or like make a perception check, I guess.
Yeah, or yeah, it was pretty much like if you were smart enough, you could find the weak point and exploit it, or if you were strong enough, you could just punch through the whole thing.
Oh
Because
yeah,
they're
of
still
course.
living beings, you could just kill them by shooting them a whole lot. But it was cool how they all had like weaknesses, and on top of that, they're like consistent beings. So like in my world, some of them were unique, but it gives you the precedent to run into like multiple of the same specific enemy. So once you learn like, oh, this creature has a really vulnerable organ under its neck, when you see it again, you
Hmm.
know that you can go for that.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah. Okay.
But of course, my
Um,
players were fighting like cyberpunk creatures, like self-animating computers and replicating drone bots.
yeah, I was thinking that's kind of like how The Witcher works. I'm not sure if I know the video game kind of works that way. I'm not sure that the an RPG built based on it would, but that you just have to find the weakness for a monster and then you kill it using that weakness.
I think Witcher does have. A tabletop role-playing game.
It must. I'm not familiar with how it works.
It does. Cool. I'll have to check that out at some point.
Yeah. But getting back to the setting, I was curious about like transport. Like, how do people get around? Like, they have bikes. Are there like flying cars? What level of technology are we at for just like common use of stuff like that?
So most people in the high city would have access to either. I would imagine rideshare would be a little bit more common for people for like like mid to like mid high class of people would have access to like
Uh-huh.
rideshare. Maybe if you have a little bit more money, you would have a personal car, but you would need somewhere to store it.
Okay.
So you'd have to have like the money to own a garage.
Yeah, yeah.
Rich people would, they have whatever the fuck they want.
Yes, of
They
course.
drive around their city in nice cars with chauffeurs. There is like hover technology, so things can, fly without rotors, but they still kind of need the space. They're very similar to the hovercraft in Cyberpunk, except I don't know if those hovercraft use propellers at all. The ones in this city would not use any propellers. They would be propelled by
Well, I
like,
was thinking maybe it could be like the ones in Minority Report, where like they still have roads that they kind of attach to, but they can almost drive vertically to allow for much more like,
oh,
usability of space.
yeah. I don't think the city would have that if only because uh, they're kind of just expanding whenever they need it. Like the city's
Uh-huh.
not
Okay.
quite as overpopulated as cyberpunk cities tend to be. It's not quite a hive city. There's a lot of people here,
Okay.
but it probably still has a you know a similar population to like New York City, which is a
Okay.
lot of people, but still like manageable road conditions. And I would imagine there's or not even there is good public transportation in the high and promenade. Like people, if they so please, would have access to like taxis and subways.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
once you get to like the mid city, you would kind of be regulated to taxis or like renting a car or a bike.
Okay. So the city's kind of built outwards, so like the outer edges don't have established public transportation,
No, the low
it sounds
city
like.
barely has roads. Like, you could probably get around on a motorcycle, but when you get to the low city, the buildings become so packed together
Oh, okay.
that it's kind of like unfeasible.
Okay, you're just like kind of negotiating between alleyways.
Yeah, so there's probably a good couple straightaways where you could comfortably drive a bike up and down, but for the most part, you'd be like contending with people and buildings.
Yeah, someone gives you directions. You got to turn left here, turn right there, then climb up this ladder, climb down that ladder over there, 'cause it's just faster than going around.
Pretty much.
Okay,
Plus,
gotcha.
my players, they really like the aesthetic of just like running across the rooftops.
Yes, yes, that does sound fun. Uh, so I'm trying to build like this whole aesthetic for the city for everyone that's listening. So I also was curious about how animals fit into the city. Like, do people have pets? Is there a lot of wildlife that survived the apocalypse? How does that fit in?
So animals that thrive in industrial settings did pretty well. So like there's
Hmm.
a lot of pigeons and probably a good couple of crows, lots of rats,
Yep.
but creatures that required more space, like livestock and wildlife, for the most part, they died out unless they were sea-based. You can still see pelicans and
Okay.
seagulls around. There's still some fish, but they're becoming increasingly uncommon, and they're pretty dangerous to eat because all the just the radiation.
Oh yeah.
um, but people still do kind of have pets. They're very rare. It's like not super common for people to have a dog. But in the high city, maybe like one in every 10 people makes enough money to be able to afford like a dog or a cat. I would imagine going beyond that, there's not many exotic animals. People might still have like snakes or reptiles just because they're pretty easy to breed in captivity.
Hmm.
But those would be much more of a luxury.
Okay. So because pets are expensive because of food or just because they're so rare?
It's a mix of them being rare and needing to buy, food and stuff for them that would just be less common. It just
Hmm.
stopped being a priority, and then all the dog food makers were destroyed because what are
Well, yeah,
they?
but they can still eat like,
Yeah, they could eat people food,
whatever.
but like all the infrastructure for that was gone. Like no one's making dog toys anymore. No one's making dog treats or pee pee pads or whatever. It doesn't seem like a
Right,
big
right.
deal, but that stuff starts to dry up. And if there's no one who's like specifically like, well, someone's gonna start making more of this, and it just kind of got to a point where the cities became more cramped and it was getting more expensive to live, so most people just stopped having animals, and it kind of fed into like an exotic market where prices started going up because now they were becoming more of like a show of a wealth.
Okay. All right. So a cat, instead of being a companion animal, is now like a status symbol.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's people who still love their animals a ton. But yeah, rich people would get like two or three cats and then have somebody else train them to be like well behaved and perfect and then just let them roam.
Okay. Um, Another thing I was curious about the city aesthetics was the like how commerce worked. Are there like, and it's probably varies between the districts. Are there like, malls, or is it like, you walk down Main Street and have shops, or is it like hole in the wall restaurants where it's, you have to like squeeze to get to your table? Are there street vendors? Like, what's the prevalence for the different areas?
So the promenade is all fine dining, like clothing restrictions, even for the rich. Club,
Pinky in the air.
yeah, pinky in the air, proper decorum. You have to know how to eat correctly in some places. You have to know where to put your fork and stuff.
Mhm.
Very much, it's almost more about public image in the promenade than anything else.
Gotcha.
High City is it's kind of like what you would imagine Boston like today. There's lots of nice restaurants that you could go eat at that are pretty fancy and a little bit more expensive. But there's also a decent amount of burger joints that just have like not real meat probably. It's probably like synthetic grown meat, but the food is not bad.
Hmm.
And as you go to the mid and low city, you would see much more of those like Hive City stalls. Specifically, the mid city would be like lots of small noodle shops and little corner stores and bodegas. And then once you hit the low city, it would only be like uh, haberdasheries, pretty much. It would be like
Okay.
people opening their home for tea or for breakfast. You would like come in and sit in somebody's dining room, and they would make you food.
Okay. That's kind of cute. I do remember that in a lot of like ancient Greek stories, the way hospitality worked is you just found a house and like went into it. And
Yeah,
there's this like implication that like, if you feed me, I won't hurt you. Um, but there's also like a responsibility on the people that you're going into their house to feed you as well as a guest.
yeah.
So it's this complicated
It's
rule.
like respect on both sides. Like when you
Right.
go to their house, you have to give them like full deference. If they ask you to eat something or try something or go somewhere, you kind of just do whatever they want you to. But they're also kind of responsible for keeping you fed and giving you whatever you need to keep
Hmm.
moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much like that because out in the low city, people don't have as much tech. The data field gets weaker the farther from the city center you get,
Oh, I didn't think of that. Yeah, that's cool.
just because the relays are mostly around uh, the border between the mid and high city. But people are just very nice down there. Like it's a hard life, so when things are tough, it's easier when you work together.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's kind of like there's not really districts in the low city, but that's where there's communities. So like the
Okay.
whole ring that surrounds the city is not fully populated. There's lots of just expanses of just empty street blocks. Maybe something bad happened. Maybe people just moved out, but they kind of huddle in little communities. So you can just head into the low city and move down the street, and all the houses you can see could just be abandoned. Maybe people lived there at one point. Maybe people got sick. Maybe there was like a terrorist attack or something, and it just wasn't worth rebuilding.
Yeah. Or like I guess because the data field is so prevalent, maybe the data field broke in that area.
Yeah, that's possible. It's not as important for the people who live out that far. They tend to use less technology.
Yeah, I suppose.
But the corporation, the Datafield Technologies, they are responsible for fucking up a lot of stuff in the Low City.
Okay, gotcha.
The kind of crux of the story is that Datafield Technologies is doing experimentations trying to mix humanity and technology. So that's where these kind of eldritch technological horrors are coming from. They're trying to do
Okay.
things like put brains in computers and try to like copy human psyche onto a hard drive. And the results of those experiments are usually like horrific, uncontrollable machines that kind of
Okay,
evolve
this
and
is definitely a question I was going to ask.
yeah,
Is yeah about how. Yeah, I was thinking like, okay, altered carbon has this thing where like you can have your consciousness on the little stacks. So do you have that where people can like, hop between bodies or into robots?
it's
Sounds like that's being developed, but not there yet.
yeah, so that's like new technology. So the first adventure my party went on was that they were in contact with kind of like a resistance person who was looking into Datafield. And they were told to go to a specific relay station where there was like a red alert happening. And
Oh,
they
okay.
went to this research station. The data field was very fucked up. One of my players was like, he had like tech vision. He had like cyber
Hmm.
eyes, so his vision kept getting messed up. And they pretty much come to this abandoned, like big, it looks like a power plant facility. And there's guards patrolling the outside, but it looks like everything is off inside. And they
Okay.
sneak in, they start looking around. Um, there's tons of dead people who have just been gunned down from every angle. And
Cool.
they find out this place is like a drone production facility. And as they begin to look around and adventure more, they start finding logs of like researchers and stuff. They learn that the facility has been having power fluctuation problems, and that it's related to an experiment a specific scientist was putting on. And then they find his logs and they start reading about Amther, which is like his, or Amther, how do I spell that? I called it Amther. It's probably not pronounced like that.
Okay. Well, it's pronounced however you say it's pronounced. It's your world.
That's true. But he keeps talking about this thing, AMTHR, and he
Okay.
keeps mentioning how this project has to succeed and how he's getting so close. And the more logs they uncover, the more kind of unhinged he appears. The scientist's name
Oh,
was
okay.
Dr. Becker. And basically, as they kind of reach the underground part of this complex and they begin to work their way through like the deep labs that were locked off from the surface, they're forced to turn the power back on to reopen this big like vaulted security door.
Okay.
So they do that, and all of a sudden they hear all the machines upstairs whirring and producing drones again.
Ooh.
And now once they're in here, they find out that Becker thinks he's finally done it. He's set out what he's like come here to do. He's avenged his mother. And then they stepped into the final room and they see a giant computer strung up with like thousands of wires into the ceiling and just tons of computer screens. And then it comes to life. And my players finally realize that AMTHR is a mother with no vowels in it.
Okay. That was actually a thought I had when I saw you wrote that in the survey. So that's cool.
Yeah, and to reinforce that, this the boss itself didn't even move. It would just sit there and spawn drones
Okay.
from the facility above that would fly in and start trying to hurt the players. So it became this balancing act of trying to either collateral, killing off a drone or two around, or trying to focus on the big bad. And once they
Okay.
destroyed enough of her, she started pulling herself free from her hardware, and she started hurling herself across the room at them with her big fucking wires.
That's really cool.
But it became this cool fight where like she's slamming from side to side of the room like I was doing it like a wrecking ball where she would just like pull herself to one side and smash into the wall. And one of my players ended up climbing on top of her because he had like hooking claws,
Uh-huh.
and he was like on top slashing away. Another player was trying to dodge them, around the room and sniping all the drones that were coming in, some of which would repair her.
Ooh,
But
cool.
they did manage to bring her down. But that's kind
That
of
does
like,
sound like a really cool fight.
yeah, that's kind of like the crux of it. It's I was going for like dark cyberpunk, like almost eldritch horror cyberpunk, trying to mix like, almost unknowably horrific machines with human psyche. So it would like scream and it would moan as they attacked it, and it would cry out like, "Why are you attacking your mother?"
Ooh. It sounds kind of like GLaDOS also, just like physically.
That was a Yeah, that was definitely an inspiration for the design a little bit. Except there's something else. I can't think of what it's from, but it's far more accurate. He wasn't quite as sleek. Mother was kind of like a giant column of computers almost. She's pretty much just a giant block of computers and screens and wires and metal. And she was
Okay.
nowhere near as tactful or subtle as GLaDOS is.
No, I mean GLaDOS is almost like a comedic villain with how she's structured. So
I love her too. She's so well written.
yes.
But yeah, that's kind of the crux, is that kind of like dark cyberpunk.
Okay, that another question I had was how do AI and robots fit into the world? So it sounds like robot technology is still something like sentient AI. Obviously, robots are around like us now in reality. Um, yeah, you want to talk more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so sentient AI would be like something Datafield would be working on. But the way they would try to achieve that is by like um, trying to copy people down. So how we talked about stacks before, that's something that they were kind of working on. That's kind of how Becker put what was left of his dying mother into the computer.
Oh, okay. All
Um,
right, so it actually is his mother, sort of.
yeah, it's like an echo of her. But
Mhm.
basically, as you can imagine, if you try to like copy a human brain onto a computer, it might do something. Like it might save some aspect of what's happening, but there's no way it's gonna get everything. It's kind of like a process of these half echoes being put into machines that's giving them like a kind of sickening sentience. Like they have the sentience of free will coming from just this weird corrupted code that is made by like copying somebody's brain onto a computer. But it's
Wasn't that the story for GLaDOS as well? Wasn't she like a copy of uh, Cave Johnson's wife?
it was his secretary, but yeah, Carolyn.
Okay.
But yeah, that was pretty much hers, except hers seemingly went much better, even though she went psychopathic. To be fair, though,
Yeah.
she did say that she didn't want to be put into the computer,
Yes,
and they
that's
forced her
right.
to, so her killing them after doesn't seem quite so out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I feel like it's okay to give spoilers to that game since it's been out for what, like 15 years now.
It's been a while since Portal 2 came out, so.
All right, so there aren't really fully functional AI that are existing within society in C City
There's
yet.
like chatbot AI. We have like information level AI is not super uncommon. Like in the high city, you could find kind of like how malls have those touch display systems. You could find those that you could like talk to and be like, "Where can I get food?" And it'll be like, "There's 6 food places within 2 blocks of you."
Yeah, yeah, but
But
yeah, that's not quite what I mean when
yeah,
I
as
say
for like
AI.
living sentient machines, pretty much, nah, there's nothing of that level yet. Nothing controllable. There's definitely creatures that have been made by data fields that they definitely don't control in any respect. Some of them have broken free and kind of just live free in the city, or rather underneath it. But they were very
Mhm.
much horrors. Like they don't really need sustenance to live, so they kind of
Okay.
just prowl the pipes, murdering people they find.
Ah, great. There's robot alligators in the sewers.
Yeah, the way I was kind of thinking it is like immediate cyberpsychosis. Like just a twinkle of
Okay.
humanity left in the functioning like brain capacity of the AI, and the rest of it is just like full cyberpsychosis.
Okay. So that was like a touchstone for people. That was like a plot point in Invincible, wasn't it? Did you see that?
The animated show, I saw the first season. I think they made a second.
Yeah, well, they're making the second now. I'm not sure it's out yet. Yeah, I meant the first season.
Oh, was that with?
Where they like go to visit a college and there's like a Frankenstein robot
Yeah,
jock
I
monster.
can't remember that guy's name. Yeah, the guy who keeps making like resurrected, uh, like cyborg people. They're almost like zombies, but they're
Yeah, and then they go crazy.
I forget what he calls them. Yeah, those things are sick, and they literally beat the crap out of Mark.
Yes, and then they try using them against his dad, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, that was. It's a little bit similar to that. They might have a hint more humanity than those creatures do, because those were kind of just like zombie berserkers.
Yeah.
There is like a little bit left of whatever those people used to be, but it's like baseline skim level thoughts.
Okay.
Like Becker's mother was pretty much reduced. Her personality was pretty much reduced down to mother, unsatisfied
Right.
mother.
Oh, unsatisfied mother.
Yeah,
Great.
I mean, I never showed it in the auto logs, but in my head, she was like one of those super like her son is like top of his field, Datafield technologies, and she's like, "You didn't do good enough."
Ooh, okay.
That's kind of the impression I was getting from like when I was coming up with like his desperation to save her.
Yeah, and that kind of matches with I'm always trying to come up with like cultural touch points. The Psycho, because the in that Norman Bates, like his mother dies and he tries to recreate her, but obviously he doesn't have robot technology, so he just like pretends that he is her and starts talking to himself using her voice.
Yeah, that's a very. I feel like if Becker wasn't immediately murdered by the machine, he probably would have killed his coworkers. But he was very much like falling apart towards the end. It was fun writing the logs though. It's one of my favorite things to do in tabletop games is like writing in-universe content, like notes to
Hmm.
people, like not to the players specifically, just like I like when players come back to like a house and they find that like somebody left a note for another NPC they know.
Yes, yes, I like that stuff
Like I
too.
just went out for eggs or something, and I'll be back. Kisses or something.
Aw.
It's just a cool way to kind of toss in a little bit more something to the story.
Yeah. All right, so I had three other things I wanted to talk about, just the setting before we go into other
Of
stuff.
course.
Which was religion. You mentioned gene splicing in your survey and cybernetics and the data field. So which one of those do you want to talk about first?
We touched a lot on the data field. It's a very nebulous thing. Uh, it
Okay.
pretty much just like allows the city to use like a pseudo magic, and it does sometimes interact negatively with the players because they're cursors. So when they're in like an area where the data field is weaker or kind of corrupted by the creatures that are there, sometimes it would do things like weaken their dark vision, or it would
Oh,
cause them
okay.
to like hear a static for a bit, depending on the player and like what kind of enhancements they had.
Well, I had more specific questions there. One of them was like, how is it used by everyday people? Like, is it for most people, is it just Wi-Fi, but like more integrated?
Yeah, it's pretty much like having fiber optic Wi-Fi. Like imagine Wi-Fi but at fiber optic speeds. Like everything is almost physically connected, so data transfers so much faster.
Hmm.
And in a lot of for normal people, it's just faster technology. Like it's just more complicated technology. Things don't have to have quite as much room to be able to receive information. So their phones work faster, and it's easier to get directions and instructions for things. Companies would use it to store stuff more effectively with like data field servers.
Is it like everything's a smart home? Is it like that level of integration, or is it still
It
like,
depends on where you live. In the promenade, yeah, it's like full smart home. Like you could walk into your house and you could use the data field for everything from turning your lights on without even speaking or moving, just like having a nodule that you can switch mentally,
uh-huh,
all the way down to the low city where they would have literally nothing. And then kind of like
of course.
high and mid city, high city would be a little bit more like upper middle class, you know, some smart appliances, smart TV, maybe like a smart coffee maker. And then mid city, people might have like one or two smart things. Like maybe they have a smart lock on their house or something just for extra security. But generally, everything connects to the data field in some way.
Okay.
It's very much a world where like everything is on the internet.
Yeah. So with it being so important, how is it protected? Like what prevents people from like hacking into my coffee maker?
So the data field, most of the defense for like specific implements is within them. They'll have their own like internal electronics where they have their own cybersecurity.
Mhm.
The data field itself is really open, which is part of what makes it so dangerous. Because you can just try to hack anything. Most things will have pretty decent security if they're important. But it's really not crazy hard to just hack into somebody's coffee maker and, make them produce coffee when people don't want it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, obviously a coffee maker would have really weak security because why would someone do that? But
The big thing with the data field, though, is the more you interact with it, the more it interacts with you. So if you hack with it a lot, it'll start to like negatively infect you. And that's one of the way the players can gain, which is in Soulbound corruption.
oh, okay. Yeah, what's that?
It's a stacking effect. You'd normally get it from killing the Akuma, those things I mentioned before. But in
Mhm.
this case, players would get it from trying to hack things where the data field was weak, or if they were trying to hack into something too dangerous, or if they were hacking too often. And it is a stacking buff and debuff. So it has an upside, usually like a small bonus to something. Maybe you move faster, maybe you hit better. But it also has a physical response. In Soulbound, you grow horns, and you grow more horns based on how much corruption you have.
Okay, so you start turning into a demon.
Yeah, literally, you turn into a demon, and that's what happens when I think Corruption 3, your character just becomes an Akuma, which is why I said they die because you just don't get to play as them anymore.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
But in this setting, it took other forms. We played around with it more because in Soulbound it's a bit limited. Like once you get corruption, you pretty much have it forever. In this
Okay.
world, we had like fading corruption that would like pass because I didn't want to just like permanently punish my players for doing something like hacking.
Uh-huh.
But it would do things like make their eye implants change colors, or it would force their cyber limbs to act in a specific way, like curl up or like flex. It was minor stuff like that for them, but when corruption got worse on one of my characters, they did start forming, what is it called? Ferrofluid? You know, that like magnetic fluid? They started
Uh-huh. Yeah.
forming horns made of that.
Ooh, cool.
And it was kind of like metal shavings were being magnetized into the shape of horns on their head. And the major downsides with those were they make you more susceptible to more corruption, uh,
Oh, okay.
and they also are very apparent to people who see them, and they're like big red flags. So
Yeah,
like,
this guy messes with the data field. Watch out, he's a hacker.
yeah, exactly. Like if you're in the mid or high city and people see your arm like twitching like that, it's not too hard for people to eventually be like, he's definitely a hacker. I'm just going to report him. But in
Mhm.
the low city, no one gives a fuck.
Yeah.
And some people in the mid city don't really care.
Sounds almost like how tattoos are with discrimination based off of them.
Oh yeah, pretty much. Yeah, like the higher class people are. Well, it makes sense if you think about it. They have more to lose. They have more at risk of people hacking them. People in the low city
Mhm.
don't give a fuck.
Yeah, yeah. I don't even have a data field coffee maker. What do I have to worry about? All right, so we talked about like corruption for people. You also mentioned that the data field itself can get corrupted. Is there a how does that work?
So the data field will become corrupted when either a relay station is damaged. So in this was the case in like I think the third adventure they went on, but they ended up near another relay station that was the result of a terrorist attack or an attempted one. Pretty
Mhm.
much a truck bombing. They drove in, tried to shut down the data field by blowing the truck up, but they just damaged it. And the effect that that had was like widespread headaches on people who had stronger data field connections, lots of malfunctioning machines in the city, lots of computers that just weren't returning data to people who requested it, like directions weren't being sent back, people weren't getting notifications, they couldn't connect.
Uh-huh.
But it can also happen when a corrupted creature is near the other people in the data field. So
Oh,
one of the ways my players, there was a point where they were moving through the sewers, and the way that they were avoiding the creature that was down there, just murdering anyone they could find, was whenever it would start getting close to them, the data field would start getting staticky, and they would be able to feel like that weakening grasp, because these creatures had such a strong influence on the field around them that they would kind of manipulate and disturb it.
it's so funny that that's kind of like how ghost stories work, where like you get goosebumps when the ghost is close to you.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of what I liked about it, because first of all, they could hear the thing like down the hallway and stuff, but there's only so much directional you can get in the sewer. Sound travels really far.
Hmm.
But it was cool because it would also force them, when they wanted to fight it, they knew that they were going to be fighting at a decent disadvantage, because each one of them would have something different that would flare up during like high corruption fights.
Uh-huh.
So like our super cybernetic player had his eyes that would usually start to fade and fail him. So he would have far
Ooh.
more trouble seeing in the dark. Our sniper would lose a lot of his hearing, so he would have trouble communicating with the rest of the party.
Oh, that's cool. How'd you like represent that for the player? Did you just tell them like you can't hear the other players, or did you have like
It
something else that you did for them?
depended on the circumstances. For like the eye problems that player was having, when he was doing like perception and searching checks, he just took like minus penalties to those.
Hmm.
For the sniper, he wasn't able to. We would like flip a coin to see whether or not he could understand what people were telling him. So he wanted more of a role play thing that he could mess with.
Okay.
So he would like routinely like talk to people in combat and be like, "Where should I go? Where do you want me to hit them?" So he would have like a 50-50 chance of just not hearing whatever they said.
Oh, and because like where you hit is important because of that like weak spot that you talked about.
Yeah, exactly. That and like further planning, like people would move in to do something, and if you shoot the creature right now, it's gonna change its target. But just like trying to plan out battle tactics was more interesting that way. And the other character
Yeah.
had a cybernetic arm that would flare up, and I made it so they would roll when they attacked, and if it was under a 5, they would lose their weapon. But
Oof.
theirs wasn't as bad because their weapon was a returning one, but it
Oh,
meant that
okay.
they would have to back off and call it back for a turn.
I see.
But that was the same person who had the magnetic thing happen. They had a lot of magnetic flavor.
Okay. Cool. Cool.
I like you know what? What's her name? Junker Queen. I don't know if you played Overwatch 2, but she had the whole Junker Queen knife thing going on way before that.
Okay. I have not played Overwatch 2. I did one, but I never made the switch.
Basically, my player had like a kukri that they could throw out and then call back with like a magnetic pole.
Hmm.
Uh,
And it like slices people on the way back too.
yeah, and if the person was like small enough, it could get stuck and like pull them forwards.
Oh, okay. That's kind of neat.
Uh, but in this instance, she would mostly use it to just not lose her weapon quite as poorly.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's multi uses.
Yeah, it worked out perfectly because he did have a cybernetic arm, so we just rolled that it had like super powerful magnets in it that were like linked to the ones in the weapon.
Hmm. Yeah. So cybernetics and gene splicing. How far does that go in the city? Are they like people walking around as dogs? I'm assuming not. But are they like walking around with dog ears?
There's not so gene splicing is more limited in gene splicing is more used by like the corporations to create horrific abominations than it is by the
Okay.
general public. There's gene splicing for the super rich for like fixing ailments, so they can like
Okay.
go in and if they want their baby to look a certain way, or if they want to try to remove a genetic condition with like CRISPR technology, that's something they
Hmm.
would have
Yep.
access to. I
Gotcha.
don't know how possible it is to like change your eye color and stuff like that with CRISPR.
I mean, we can just say it's possible
That's
for
kind of
your
what I
campaign.
ruled
Why
in my
not?
world. I like to try to keep some science in it, but I wasn't sure the limits of CRISPR.
You probably could, because like the way I understand it, eyes, like you have this like set, like it takes pigment, and there's this process where it gets darker and darker. And the way you have a certain eye color is you break the gene that has it go to the next step. So we just use CRISPR to break whatever that gene is on both chromosomes.
Yeah. So in my world, that was kind of like the limits of it. It was like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's like blue, green, hazel, brown is the usual color transition. I guess there's that really like pink color that albino people can have.
Oh, that's true.
So there's a color before blue.
But yeah, that's kind of like
That's like a lack of pigment.
yeah, that's like the limits of the gene splicing technology is kind of like light CRISPR.
Okay, all right. So it's more like what we think of for gene splicing in our own world.
Yeah, there is a bit more that we wouldn't think of in the like the Eldritch Horror aspects, but that's more of like the putting brains in computers and splicing AI and human thought. None of
Okay.
which is having any positive results.
Yeah. What about how prevalent is cybernetics? Like, so you've talked about like all the cool aspects, but is it very common? Like, are people walking around with like a chef gets a hand replacement so they can cut vegetables faster or something like that?
So it is primarily profession based. So basically, the city normally has like they're hard to enforce, but they have like cybernetic limitations on what people are allowed to have. So anyone
Hmm.
can get like a phone put in their head or like something that can help them flip lights on and off in their house.
Uh-huh.
But if you happen to work in like a dockyard, you can like submit a request and get like an exoskeleton, like an or an interior exoskeleton to like make you lift get stronger. But that's kind of devolved to like, yeah, a chef, if they're really high class, might have like a mechanical hand or a mechanical arm to make preparing food easier. The general public might have stuff like some people might have arm implants just for like general secretarial work because it's
Uh-huh.
kind of just like having a big phone.
Yeah, yeah.
But like blue collar professions is where it really shines the most. So those guilds I was talking about before, like the companies,
Uh-huh.
they were produced. I'll go through some of them because it works well. For example, there's Chopco, Industrial Supply and Demolitions. They
Okay.
would provide cybernetics to people who work in everything from construction to scrapping and salvaging. So they would be giving people things like exo arms and stuff like that that are made for handling dangerous materials or breaking things.
Okay.
There is NanoTread, secured courier service, which would be providing like movement-based stuff. They would give people grappling hooks. They would give people like foot implants for like like Heelys, but in the future.
Okay, yeah.
There's SciLife, BioAugments, and MedTech Corporation, which is like all kinds of liver enhancements and stuff like that. Uh, and then there's a bunch that are mostly military based. That would be for like security or uh, some people just like having cool cyber eyes.
Yeah, yeah. Are the enhancements something that are easily swapped out usually, or is it more often just a permanent modification?
It depends on the make and model, but most of them are pretty permanent. A lot of them replace something that's already there. So like
Mhm.
it's kind of hard to get a new arm. It's not as hard to swap out like two cyber arms.
Yeah, that's more what I meant. Like you have an arm for, going to work and lifting heavy stuff, and then you have your arm at home for like fine motor things like eating dinner and reading a book.
I would imagine that some people have that, but there's probably a fair number of people who wouldn't, who would just kind of adapt to having an arm that just wouldn't be good at delicate tasks.
Hmm.
But I would also imagine that they would recommend that that goes on your non-dominant arm,
Yeah, yeah, I suppose.
because it would also give you far better structure and control of that limb. Doesn't really matter if you're right or left-handed if the other arm's going to be fully cybernetic.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
But yeah, the rich people would have modular limbs, or the people who would value that could invest in like a second cyber arm that would be more casual.
Okay, so that sounds like that's limited kind of by funding.
Yeah, it's limited by funding, and a lot of people just like they don't have the need for it. A lot of the cybernetics aren't too obtrusive.
Hmm.
Uh, some of the military ones are, and some of the chop shop ones are. But for the most part, it's like internal stuff or like outer body stuff.
Okay. Um, so you had like a interesting religion that you mentioned in your survey for C City. And you said there were other religions, but there weren't that many. Is C City like on Earth, or is this like a different reality with different continents and history?
It is on Earth. It's like a post-apocalyptic Earth, so some of the existing religions still kind of are still kind of there. Some people still have some Christian values. Some people still have some Judaism stuff going on. Some a little bit
Hmm.
of Buddhism. But for the most part, like organized religion would be very weak in this moment in time. There might be like
Yeah.
a church or two in the city, maybe like a mosque or a synagogue, but that would probably be it. And all the super religious people would just live near it. But for the most part, people would worship like technology, kind of in a nebulous stance.
Uh,
They would just think like, the kind of like how technology is now, it's almost irreverent. But there would also be a small collection of people who fully understand technology as like a new god, and who see the
okay.
data field as like kind of a prophet. And those are some of the people. So there's almost two factions who are creating eldritch horrors, just of different kinds. Datafield is making all these giant, horrific monster beings because they have all these resources. And then there's small little cults that I mentioned before who are making more cyber psychos of people, just by like fully opening their brain to the data field, removing any limiters that there would be, just like subjecting people to these bizarre experiments just because they believe like getting closer to this technology is getting you closer to God or something.
Yeah. Okay.
But they're not like a proper organized religion. Those are like sects of cult.
Yeah. Yeah. That's more like a cult with how you're describing it.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, generally religion is kind of fallen by the wayside at this time.
Okay. And you mentioned is this NoSnet, NewsNet? How do you pronounce this word?
Which one?
In your survey, you mentioned that there was a like AI that hadn't gotten free into the data field, um, and was like people were worshiping that.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the. It's those are one of the Akuma. So like that's one of those devil things,
Oh,
and they
okay.
do have a hand in guiding those cults. But they are very much just for just like the assimilation of humanity. It's not like they want humanity to be destroyed, but the way I was understanding it is they're manifestations of technology. Kind of just like the way I imagined it was now that people are starting to like emotionally link to the data field, which is what cursors are. There are people who are
Hmm.
like developing like a biological ability to connect to this. Now that that's happening more and more, it's kind of like the warp in 40K. Like it's skimming their emotions and
Oh,
feelings,
yeah.
and it's using that to create these creatures.
Okay.
And those creatures are seeking to, create more of their kind. So they're trying to push people to integrate more with technology.
Okay.
So I think there was a specific one that I put in there. I don't know what name I put on the survey.
Well, that's fine. No, if it was important, you would remember.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's been a couple.
Okay. Um, so that was a pretty exhaustive look at the world. Did you want to talk about your campaign a little bit?
Um, I mean it's been kind of playing out like a cyberpunk campaign. It's been a big mix of like resistance meetings and like doing small things around for the people. Uh, it's pretty much just been going like they'll meet a new community or group of people and then start interacting with them and then move on. So that kind of
Okay.
started with the resistance because they were all kind of doing their own thing and they got hired by a contractor who wanted them to steal some information for him. and that kind of devolved into them meeting the resistance, who are these people who just don't like the data field, and they're seeing it as like a corruptive force. So they're trying to curb its use, and they're trying to understand it better so they can take it down.
Okay.
Then they started meeting the gangs, who are trying to like further the agenda of Avernus. There's a whole bunch who all want different things, but basically just expanding the criminal underground. And they have done a bit of work
Gotcha.
for the corpos. But, you know, they don't really like the corporations, understandably.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So it sounds like it's more of an episodic campaign without as much of a central focus
Yeah,
yet, anyway.
yeah, they'll pretty much. It's kind of almost been monster of the week, which is what I try to avoid, but it's kind of just been working out better that way. So they'll
Uh-huh.
pretty much like meet a group of people, find out what problem they have, go to try to solve it, and see how it's related to what's like the greater story.
Yeah.
And then when they
Yeah.
resolve that, there's usually like a lead to the next thing. I'll try to give them options too, like more than one thing going on at once, so they can kind of pick which way they want to go.
Hmm.
But it's very much been playing out as that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to initially like explore a world, and then you can develop a larger story after you've gotten those initial steps of, okay, yeah, this is what this world is like. These are the different groups and people within it,
Yeah, they're still
and
kind of
you
like
can move from there.
I want to do a bit more, maybe like another month or two of them kind of exploring the city and getting to meet a couple more of the people. I want them to interact with some of the megacorps that aren't Datafield a bit more,
Uh-huh.
because not all of them are bad. Some of them are just companies just doing what companies do.
Right.
And then I do want them to spend some time in the reaches because they haven't really gone to the low city much.
Hmm.
They haven't been out to the reaches at all.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, why would you want to?
it's cool out there. There's cowboys. I thought it would be way more interesting if it's like super high cowboy culture. So like
Okay. Yeah.
it's a mix of like a Mad Max and like as close to cowboys can get while people are still riding like dirt bikes and motorcycles.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had a lot of cool stuff planned. Like there's a techno barbarian out there who they're gonna fight. Just somebody from the mid city who made it up to the high city, had some luck, made some money, and then they realized like shit, if I just invest every cent of money I have into just making myself physically strong, and then I just go to where people don't have any tech, I could be their god.
Oh. Yeah. I guess.
So he just invested in specifically non-data field related cybernetics, which
Okay.
are
Yeah, because there's no data field out
yeah
there.
far more expensive and far more rustic. So that's like the old shit. That's like the cyberpunk red level of tech.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you got to get rustic when you're going out to the Wild West.
Yeah, but he's also like way tougher than a normal person, just to supplant for his weak cybernetics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That does sound like a pretty cool villain.
Yeah, so I want to kind of give the players a chance to kind of hit every community once, and then I want to see what they're feeling. Right now, they kind of dig the mid city because that's where most of them lived. So some of them have contacts. One of them was like part of a child gang there, so they still take care of the other members. One of them was a detective, so his office was there. So they're really like they're feeling mid city, and once they kind of decide on like what side of this conflict they want to take and who they want to like back, I'm going to open up the city a bit more for them to kind of start making their own moves.
Okay. Yeah. That that does sound pretty cool. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or wish I'd asked you about the world or your campaign?
Uh, Not really. I will mention that I'm always heavily inspired by music, and I will send you the playlist that I had for this that Pseudo inspired it.
Oh, cool.
Some of the songs in here I just had known from a long time ago, and they kind of like helped me build the aesthetic in my head.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah. One of my friends also does his campaigns based around music when he's DMing, so that's really neat.
I love to pack music references into my settings too. Like I'll give players the names of bands, or I'll like uh, base a specific scenario on like something that comes up in a song.
Yeah, yeah, that's really neat. Um, Well, my usual final question is, do you have any advice you want to share with any other DMs about something you've learned through creating this world?
Not this world specifically, but the best advice I have for anyone who is a DM or who wants to be a DM is you just have to do it. I've met so many people who just say like, I want a DM, but I just haven't had time to write like a good story, or I just don't feel like I know the game well enough yet. And the only way you could possibly get better is just by doing it. Like it's never hard. It's never as hard as you think. In the end, as long as you just keep the game moving, you don't have to know every rule. It doesn't have to be the most balanced experience, and you'll get better. So that's
Yeah,
definitely my
cool.
advice. You just got to get out there and do it.
Yep. Yeah, the first step to creation is starting to create.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for coming on the show, Kima. It was great having you here.
Thanks for having me.